They told you money is earned only by sweat and struggle. And what if I tell you Neville Goddard whispered a deeper truth, where money is not outside you, but inside your imagination? This is how it unfolds, because Neville dared to say consciousness is the only reality, and all that you see, including the money in your hands, flows out of it. This is where the illusion deepens, for people chase jobs, deals, and hustles, believing the outer world is the source of their fortune. This is why it matters, because Neville reversed the order and declared that the outer world is just the shadow of your inner assumption. This is where destiny rewrites itself, for once you know the cause lies within, you stop begging the effect to change. This is how truth destabilizes lies, since you realize you never needed permission from the economy or gatekeepers. This is where the curtain lifts, showing that imagination itself is the architect of wealth. This is why the question changes from how do I make money to what state am I occupying? This is where the old world trembles, for it cannot survive when you claim yourself as the source. This is how the new begins, because in Neville's teaching, wealth is not earned but assumed. This is where belief becomes law, as your inner conviction solidifies into outer fact. This is how freedom announces itself, because once you command within, money becomes obedient without. This is where confusion dissolves, as you no longer run after results, but live from the cause. This is why circumstances lose power, for you stop bowing to them and make them bow to you. This is where the story demands attention, because it is no longer about labor, but about consciousness. This is how the mind becomes the treasury, because every assumption is a deposit and every feeling a withdrawal. This is where the deeper revelation whispers that money is not separate but a mirror of who you are. This is why Neville's voice carries, because it pierces the illusion of poverty at its roots. This is where the narrative sets its stage, with you standing not as victim but creator. This is how the journey opens, and it begins with the question: if consciousness creates money, then what state will you dare to assume tonight? Can you imagine standing at the threshold of a world where everything you own, wear, and spend has its origin in your unseen thoughts? This is how it unfolds, because Neville insisted again and again that consciousness is the only reality. This is where the illusion deepens, as people mistake the outer facts for causes when they are only reflections. This is why it matters, because if you misplace cause and effect, you spend life fixing mirrors instead of faces. This is where destiny rewrites itself, once you recognize that the face is your state of consciousness and the mirror is money. This is how truth unravels delusion, for every dollar you ever touched was preceded by an assumption you held. This is where the story grows, because instead of feeling powerless before the economy, you recognize yourself as its source. This is why Neville was radical, because he stripped away excuses and left you alone with your imagination. This is where resistance rises, because people don't want that much responsibility. This is how clarity pierces fog, since whether you want it or not, your state is still shaping your financial world. This is where the stakes heighten, because no escape exists from the law of consciousness. This is why Neville spoke with certainty, declaring that all states are eternal, and all wealth is yours if you dare to assume it. This is where possibility widens, because nothing is denied to the one who persists in assumption. This is how the invisible becomes visible, as inner feeling crystallizes into outer coin. This is where the keys are handed, because knowing consciousness as the only reality gives you mastery over finance. This is why every paycheck, every opportunity, every windfall is nothing but the echo of inner belief. This is where disbelief collapses, because the evidence of your life confirms what you assumed yesterday. This is how sovereignty feels, to know that no boss or system decides your worth, but your inner conviction. This is where the invitation begins, because Neville calls you to step out of poverty consciousness into wealth consciousness. This is why the principle of consciousness is not theory, but the root of every dollar you will ever manifest. Now consider this. What if every coin, note, or deposit that entered your life was never truly created by work, luck, or chance, but by an invisible cause moving beneath the surface? This is how it unfolds, because Neville explained that everything visible in the world is nothing more than a shadow cast by your inner state. This is where the illusion deepens, as men and women scramble after shadows, mistaking them for sources. This is why it matters, because once you know the cause is invisible, you stop wasting energy rearranging outer effects. This is where destiny shifts, for instead of chasing opportunities, you create them through assumption. This is how freedom breathes, because your inner state cannot be taxed, stolen, or denied. This is where clarity sharpens, as you realize your financial life is a projection of unseen belief. This is why Neville pressed the point, reminding his students that no external fact has life in itself. This is where resistance fights back, for the ego cries, "But I worked for my money." This is how truth answers, by showing even your work was chosen, shaped, and sustained by assumption. This is where the curtain parts, revealing the invisible hand of consciousness, painting your bank statements. This is why Neville declared boldly that imagination, not effort, is the only cause. This is where the world trembles, for if you accept this, no external power can enslave you financially again. This is how the inner kingdom expands, because within you lies the treasury of all wealth. This is where responsibility rises, because if you created yesterday's money, you also created yesterday's lack. This is why the law is impartial, granting wealth or poverty depending on the assumption you dare to live in. This is where the deeper truth whispers, reminding you that unseen causes precede every visible dollar. This is how faith ignites, for knowing the law frees you from chance and anchors you in certainty. This is where the invitation grows louder, asking if you will continue chasing shadows or turn to the true cause. This is why Neville's teaching on the invisible cause of wealth demands to be lived, not merely heard. Picture for a moment the astonishing claim that whatever you assume to be true hardens into fact, and that this single law governs every corner of your financial world. This is how it unfolds, because Neville framed the law of assumption as the axis upon which all manifestation turns. This is where the illusion deepens, as most people assume lack and then complain when life delivers more lack. This is why it matters, because assumption is not wishful thinking, but the creative act itself. This is where destiny bends, because the moment you assume wealth, the world begins aligning with that conviction. This is how evidence appears, first faintly, then boldly, as the assumption crystallizes into reality. This is where resistance mocks, whispering that it's delusion to feel rich when poor. This is why Neville commanded persistence, urging his students to remain faithful until the outer obeyed the inner. This is where possibility blooms, because every financial miracle you've ever heard of began as an assumption in someone's mind. This is how the future takes shape, because assumptions sculpt the unseen into the seen. This is where discipline is born, for you must watch what you assume in idle moments. This is why the careless assume bills, debt, and struggle, while the conscious assume abundance, surplus, and joy. This is where the law proves impartial, granting both poverty and wealth, depending on the assumption entertained. This is how mastery is gained, because once you understand this law, nothing can be withheld from you. This is where the inner command rings, telling you to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. This is why Neville's students saw transformations, because they dared to act and feel as if wealth were already theirs. This is where the drama intensifies, as you recognize that every assumption is a seed with guaranteed harvest. This is how sovereignty feels, because your future no longer depends on chance, but on conscious assumption. This is where the challenge stares, asking if you will assume wealth when evidence shouts poverty. This is why the law of assumption stands as Neville's most daring weapon for financial freedom. Suppose you discover that the two most overlooked words in your life, I am, hold the key to every fortune you will ever manifest. This is how it unfolds, because Neville revealed that I am is the name of God, the eternal creative presence in you. This is where the illusion deepens, for most people attach poverty, struggle, or lack to I am without realizing they are declaring their fate. This is why it matters, because what you attach to I am becomes flesh in your life. This is where destiny transforms, when instead of saying I am broke, you dare to say, I am wealthy with conviction. This is how identity rewires, as your subconscious accepts your I am statements as law. This is where the story grows, because every declaration becomes a blueprint for your finances. This is why Neville insisted that God and your own consciousness are one. This is where clarity pierces, because the words I am are not small phrases but divine commands. This is how the atmosphere shifts, when you begin to feel the weight of I am rich resonating through your body. This is where doubt protests, mocking the gap between words and bank accounts. This is why Neville commanded persistence, urging students to hold the declaration until fact bowed to identity. This is where power concentrates, for the more you repeat, I am wealthy with feeling, the more the state anchors. This is how the inner temple builds, because your sense of self becomes a treasury overflowing with abundance. This is where the veil lifts, showing that I am precedes every transaction you will ever touch. This is why poverty cannot cling to one who identifies as wealth itself. This is where responsibility deepens, because every misuse of I am is a misuse of divine power. This is how sovereignty awakens, because your financial world bends to the identity you affirm. This is where the question confronts you. What will you dare to place after I am tonight? This is why Neville's teaching on I am remains the unshakable cornerstone of financial transformation. Envision a world where every longing for more money, more freedom, or more abundance is not greed, but a sacred whisper from the divine within you. This is how it unfolds, because Neville taught that desire is not an enemy, but the map of your destiny. This is where the illusion deepens, as many were told to suppress desires, thinking them selfish or dangerous. This is why it matters, because if the desire to expand is God's voice, then rejecting it is rejecting life itself. This is where destiny reshapes, for once you honor your desires, you begin walking toward wealth with reverence. This is how freedom sings, when you realize your hunger for financial ease is holy, not profane. This is where courage rises, because to accept desire as divine is to accept your worthiness of wealth. This is why Neville urged his students never to feel guilty for wanting more. This is where possibility ignites, because every desire contains the seed of its fulfillment. This is how the universe responds, by arranging circumstances to match the intensity of your inner longing. This is where resistance mocks, calling desire dangerous ambition. This is why truth answers, reminding you that desire is love seeking expression in form. This is where the current of life carries you, because your wish already knows the way to its own manifestation. This is how abundance feels, when you no longer fear desire but welcome it as a friend. This is where perspective shifts, for you see that every financial dream is not vanity, but divine unfolding. This is why Neville declared that your desire is proof of its own possibility. This is where gratitude arises, because to want is to know more is already given. This is how destiny bends, for every sincere financial wish is life demanding growth through you. This is where the invitation burns, asking if you will treat desire as holy or as guilt. This is why Neville's teaching makes money sacred, because desire itself is the voice of God. Think of the moment when Neville revealed that it is not enough to simply want money, you must feel as though it is already yours. This is how it unfolds, because feeling, not thought alone, impresses the subconscious. This is where the illusion deepens, as most people think wishing and hoping is enough. This is why it matters, because the subconscious responds only to feeling, never to mere words. This is where destiny bends, because the moment you generate the feeling of wealth, reality begins to echo it. This is how bridges form, as unseen events rise to meet your assumed state. This is where the resistance of logic protests, saying, "But I can't feel rich when I'm broke." This is why Neville insisted on persistence, urging students to rehearse the feeling until it became natural. This is where the inner shift transforms, for once the feeling stabilizes, the world cannot help but mirror it. This is how the atmosphere changes, because feeling wealthy attracts wealth like metal to magnet. This is where imagination deepens, for you don't just think of money, you feel the texture, smell the notes, sense the relief. This is why Neville guided his students into sleep with these feelings, planting them deep in subconscious soil. This is where miracles awaken, for the subconscious accepts the feeling as fact and orchestrates events. This is how life rearranges, sending opportunities, promotions, and gifts out of nowhere. This is where your faith matures, because you realize it is feeling, not effort, that births money. This is why Neville's teaching pierced illusions, showing that wishing without feeling is sterile. This is where the story intensifies, because to feel is to claim before possession. This is how sovereignty speaks, for your ability to feel creates wealth beyond circumstances. This is where the challenge confronts you. Can you dare to feel rich tonight? This is why Neville's law of feeling remains the master key to financial abundance. Ask yourself what happens when you no longer think of wealth as a distant dream, but live as though it is already your reality. This is how it unfolds, because Neville commanded his students to occupy the end state, not the middle. This is where the illusion deepens, as many remain stuck imagining the process instead of the outcome. This is why it matters, because imagining getting money keeps you in the state of lack. This is where destiny shifts, when you skip to the end and dwell in the identity of wealth itself. This is how inner victory feels, because living from the end erases struggle. This is where resistance protests, whispering that it's fake to pretend. This is why truth answers, declaring that assumption is not pretending but creating. This is where freedom rises, because when you dwell in the end, the journey arranges itself. This is how life responds, by aligning every event with the end state you already occupy. This is where the paradox glows, because living from the end makes the end inevitable. This is why Neville's voice thundered with conviction. Assume it, and it is so. This is where courage steadies you, because no matter what outer facts shout, you remain in the end. This is how miracles materialize, because the world bends to your inner completion. This is where persistence proves its power, as living from the end daily reshapes destiny. This is why doubt dies, for once you inhabit wealth within, outer evidence must obey. This is where the revelation deepens, because living from the end is the ultimate act of faith. This is how sovereignty expands, for you no longer wait for wealth, you are wealth. This is where the question pierces. Will you dare to inhabit the end until life concedes? This is why Neville's teaching on living from the end remains the crown jewel of his method. Consider the possibility that every empire, fortune, or inheritance ever known began first as an image in someone's imagination. This is how it unfolds, because Neville declared imagination not as fantasy but as reality itself. This is where the illusion deepens, as most dismiss imagination as child's play. This is why it matters, because what you imagine with feeling becomes the seed of your lived experience. This is where destiny transforms. Once you stop doubting imagination and start worshiping it as creator. This is how bridges of wealth form, for imagination selects the state that the subconscious enacts. This is where resistance scoffs, asking, how can daydreams make money? This is why truth responds, because daydreams charged with feelings solidify into fact. This is where history testifies, as every invention, fortune, and business was imagined before built. This is how power hums, because imagination is the womb of financial reality. This is where courage demands faith, because you must honor the unseen before it shows. This is why Neville guided students into ersatz, the state akin to sleep, to imagine vividly. This is where miracles sprout, as what was once invisible becomes a deposit, a contract, or a gift. This is how the law proves itself, again and again, through those who dare to imagine wealth. This is where sovereignty awakens, because you no longer beg reality, you design it. This is why poverty shrinks, because it cannot survive against sustained imaginative power. This is where the veil thins, for imagination reveals itself as the only true reality. This is how destiny unfolds, as every coin you touch flows from a scene you once imagined. This is where the final question stings. What financial world will you dare to imagine tonight? This is why Neville's cry, imagination creates reality, still echoes as a timeless law of wealth. Think of the moment when you realize that even your past financial mistakes, debts, or humiliations can be rewritten in imagination until they serve your abundance. This is how it unfolds, because Neville taught revision as a tool to reshape not just the future, but the past. This is where the illusion deepens, for the world insists the past is fixed. This is why it matters, because if the past shapes the present, then to revise the past is to free the future. This is where destiny rewrites itself, as you replay past financial traumas in imagination until they align with wealth. This is how healing comes, because revision removes guilt and shame from your financial history. This is where resistance argues, saying, but the facts already happened. This is why Neville replied, facts are not final, assumptions are. This is where courage steps in, because revising requires daring to believe the past can bend. This is how power grows, when yesterday's failures no longer weigh on today's choices. This is where miracles unfold, because a revised past produces a freer present and abundant future. This is why Neville's students saw debts erased and opportunities appear after revision. This is where faith strengthens, because if the past can change, nothing is impossible. This is how the subconscious obeys, taking the revised scene as the new fact. This is where the chains break, because revision frees you from repeating cycles of lack. This is why Neville's method shatters despair, for no past failure can bind you. This is where possibility opens, because even your worst money mistakes can serve your wealth story. This is how sovereignty shines, because you are not victim to history, but master of it. This is where the invitation presses. What past event will you dare to revise tonight? This is why Neville's teaching on revision remains one of the most liberating tools for financial freedom. Suppose you discover that the secret to Neville's teaching on money is not a single act of imagination, but the relentless persistence of remaining in the state of wealth until it becomes fact. This is how it unfolds, because assumption is not a one-time ritual, but a continual dwelling. This is where the illusion deepens, as most people test the law for a night and then surrender to doubt. This is why it matters, because only persistence hardens assumption into reality. This is where destiny takes shape, because repetition of the state engraves it into the subconscious. This is how miracles prove themselves, when a maintained inner wealth eventually manifests as outer supply. This is where resistance rises, shouting that nothing is happening. This is why Neville urged students to persist even when evidence screamed lack. This is where the drama intensifies, because persistence demands courage to ignore appearances. This is how the law shows impartiality, granting wealth only to those who persist as if already wealthy. This is where inner muscles grow, because persisting in wealth consciousness strengthens creative power. This is why Neville compared persistence to planting and tending a seed until harvest. This is where sovereignty expands, because you no longer depend on luck, you depend on law. This is how the story of wealth matures, as each persistent assumption gathers momentum. This is where patience becomes sacred, for it bridges the invisible with the visible. This is why doubt collapses, because persistence denies it air to breathe. This is where endurance glows, as you hold the inner state until life must conform. This is how authority feels, when persistence crowns you with proof. This is where the question pierces, will you persist when nothing yet appears? This is why Neville's call to persistence stands as the dividing line between dreamers and creators. Consider the possibility that true faith is not blind belief in outer facts, but loyalty to the unseen inner state until it crystallizes into money in hand. This is how it unfolds, because Neville defined faith as loyalty to the unseen reality you dare to claim. This is where the illusion deepens, as religion often teaches faith as waiting rather than creating. This is why it matters, because faith in poverty sustains poverty, just as faith in wealth sustains wealth. This is where destiny matures, for faith becomes the bridge between imagination and manifestation. This is how certainty roots itself when you remain loyal to the unseen until it appears. This is where doubt wages war, mocking invisible riches. This is why Neville urged students to anchor themselves in the unseen as though it were already fact. This is where the unseen gains weight, as the more you honor it, the faster it solidifies. This is how financial miracles appear, because loyalty to the unseen forces life to obey. This is where conviction grows, as faith redefines what is real to you. This is why Neville rejected begging prayers, for true prayer is faith that it is already done. This is where the atmosphere thickens, because sustained faith charges the unseen with substance. This is how the invisible becomes visible, through unwavering loyalty. This is where hope is left behind, replaced by knowing. This is why Neville's faith feels revolutionary, because it shifts power back to you. This is where courage holds firm, because faith survives storms of doubt. This is how sovereignty sounds when you declare it is done, though unseen. This is where the question confronts you, what unseen state will you remain loyal to tonight? This is why Neville's teaching defines faith as the ultimate financial weapon. Now consider this. Wealth is not money in your pocket, but a state of being that money obediently follows. This is how it unfolds, because Neville taught that all states exist eternally and wealth is simply a state you can occupy. This is where the illusion deepens, as people think they must acquire wealth externally. This is why it matters, because when you enter the wealth state, money must conform. This is where destiny shifts, because being wealthy inside forces reality to echo that identity. This is how the law simplifies, because you no longer chase effects, but dwell in cause. This is where resistance mocks, saying states are imaginary and unreal. This is why truth replies that what you call unreal is the womb of all reality. This is where freedom appears, because wealth as a state is available now, not later. This is how transformation begins, when you clothe yourself inwardly in wealth. This is where power solidifies, because your state determines your environment. This is why Neville insisted all states are available, waiting for you to choose. This is where responsibility rises, because no one can keep you from the wealth state but you. This is how the illusion dies, when you see that wealth is not earned but assumed. This is where the story clarifies, because your financial condition is only your state made visible. This is why Neville's message cut so deeply, for it left no excuse to remain in lack. This is where possibility stretches, because every fortune already exists in state. This is how sovereignty resonates, when you claim wealth as identity rather than chase it. This is where the question lands. Which state will you inhabit tonight? This is why Neville's teaching that wealth is a state remains the simplest doorway to abundance. Picture for a moment the strange yet comforting truth that once you assume wealth, life will weave together a bridge of incidents leading you there. This is how it unfolds, because Neville explained that assumption sets unseen forces in motion. This is where the illusion deepens, as people panic when life shuffles circumstances unexpectedly. This is why it matters, because the bridge may look like chaos, yet it is precision. This is where destiny steers, because every step along the bridge is necessary to the end. This is how surrender feels when you allow life to arrange the details. This is where resistance flares, complaining that events seem random or unfair. This is why truth answers, reminding you that the bridge bends only toward fulfillment. This is where faith steadies, because you no longer fear interruptions. You see design. This is how the path reveals itself, step by step, as assumption carves direction. This is where gratitude whispers, because even the detours serve the end. This is why Neville's teaching comforts, because nothing is wasted on the bridge. This is where patience strengthens, because the bridge carries you faster when trusted. This is how sovereignty feels, when you walk in calm certainty of the outcome. This is where fear dissolves, for nothing can block the assumed end. This is why Neville insisted you live in the end, not in the process. This is where the mystery unfolds, because the bridge often surprises with better outcomes than expected. This is how trust matures, because you no longer demand control of the how. This is where the invitation stands. Will you trust the bridge of incidents tonight? This is why Neville's teaching on the bridge remains a lifeline for financial manifestation. Envision a life where every thought you entertain becomes a brick in the financial house you live in tomorrow. This is how it unfolds, because Neville emphasized mental diet as the guardian of your wealth consciousness. This is where the illusion deepens, as most people feed on thoughts of bills, debt, and lack daily. This is why it matters, because every idle thought is a silent assumption. This is where destiny clears, for once you control thought, you control wealth. This is how discipline sharpens, as you refuse to dwell on poverty or fear. This is where resistance argues, saying thoughts are harmless. This is why truth insists, for every thought is a seed with harvest guaranteed. This is where vigilance grows, as you guard against negativity that poisons your wealth state. This is how financial atmosphere forms, charged by repeated inner dialogue. This is where miracles blossom, because sustained wealthy thoughts generate opportunities. This is why Neville warned against idle worry, because worry is prayer for lack. This is where strength builds, as you train the mind to persist in abundance. This is how the law rewards, by echoing your mental diet in financial outcomes. This is where the world reflects, mirroring your atmosphere of thought. This is why Neville urged students to imagine noble and rich things daily. This is where sovereignty sharpens, for you become master of inner climate. This is how destiny blossoms, because thoughts repeated shape states, and states shape money. This is where the invitation asks, what thoughts will you feed yourself tonight? This is why Neville's teaching on mental diet remains essential to wealth creation. Picture for a moment what happens when you step into a room already carrying the invisible fragrance of wealth, even before a single coin arrives. This is how it unfolds, because Neville insisted that feeling is the secret, and without it, assumption remains barren. This is where the illusion deepens, for many repeat affirmations mechanically while still feeling lack within. This is why it matters, because the subconscious does not hear words. It only registers tones of feeling. This is where destiny rewrites itself, for when you can feel wealthy in imagination, outer facts must bend to reflect it. This is how truth steadies itself, since no effort can override the dominant emotion you carry. This is where the secret turns golden, because money responds not to want, but to possession already felt. This is why Neville trained students to feel as though their wish were fulfilled right now. This is where the real magic awakens, because in the silence of imagination, you can already hold the banknote, walk the store, and taste the richness. This is how the subconscious is impressed, when the feeling of wealth saturates you like perfume. This is where the turning begins, because soon the outer world rearranges to match the inner state. This is why rituals and struggles fade, for feeling accomplished in imagination is the only ritual needed. This is where the power deepens, because a consistent mood of wealth guarantees outer supply. This is how miracles become ordinary, as what you felt yesterday becomes what you spend today. This is where the subconscious proves its loyalty, always giving you what you inwardly believe. This is why feeling is more powerful than sight, for unseen conviction will always sculpt seen reality. This is where resistance falls, because you stop fighting for money and start embodying it. This is how the atmosphere shifts, for when you enter rooms as wealth, rooms must treat you as wealth. This is where the story insists, because every coin you hold will testify to the feeling that birthed it. This is why the feeling of wealth is the greatest treasure you can practice daily, until it becomes your second skin. Now consider this. What if every financial breakthrough in your life could be traced to a single assumption you dared to hold? This is how it unfolds, because Neville's law of assumption says that whatever you assume is true, though unseen, will harden into fact. This is where the illusion deepens, as many assume poverty, lack, and delay, without realizing those assumptions are creative. This is why it matters, because assumptions are not casual thoughts, but living seeds planted in the fertile soil of imagination. This is where destiny rewrites itself, for wealth is not reserved for a chosen few, but for anyone who dares to assume it now. This is how clarity cuts through confusion, since life cannot deny the one who inwardly walks as rich. This is where the story intensifies, because assumption requires persistence, even when the world shows no evidence. This is why Neville said, "You must live in the end," for assumption of the wish fulfilled is the only true act of creation. This is where resistance comes, because the senses scream lack while the inner eye insists abundance. This is how the faithful prevail, since persistence in assumption dissolves all contradictions. This is where miracles enter, because once you live as though already supplied, doors open in ways logic cannot predict. This is why Neville's law is simple, yet demanding, for it requires you to die daily to the old state. This is where the challenge transforms, because you stop asking, "When will it come?" and begin declaring, "It is done." This is how maturity is measured, by the steadiness of assumption despite appearances. This is where the outer world obeys, reshaping itself to prove your inner conviction. This is why Neville dared to say assumption, not effort, is the path to riches. This is where fear fades, because nothing can stop the state that is faithfully occupied. This is how destiny expands, for you realize money is just another shadow of inner choice. This is where the law shines, showing that assumption is the golden key to unlock any vault. This is why applying the law of assumption to money will always lead you to the wealth you already carry inside. Suppose you discover that every statement beginning with "I am" writes a script the universe must obey. This is how it unfolds, because Neville revealed that I am is the name of God in you, and therefore the creative word of power. This is where the illusion deepens, since people declare I am broke or I am struggling, without realizing they are pronouncing law. This is why it matters, because every I am seals an identity that the subconscious works tirelessly to confirm. This is where destiny rewrites itself, for when you say I am wealthy, you claim a state that already exists in eternity. This is how energy shifts, because I am is not a wish but a command. This is where realization sharpens, as you stop begging for money and start declaring yourself one with supply. This is why Neville urged his students to never misuse I am with words of lack. This is where the secret stirs, because when you say I am abundance, you ignite the state of wealth itself. This is how feeling joins words, saturating I am with the emotion of truth. This is where the subconscious yields, bowing to the authority of identity. This is why it transforms your life, because I am never returns void. This is where authority awakens, since you hold the same creative utterance spoken at the beginning of time. This is how wealth consciousness stabilizes through daily practice of sacred self-identification. This is where transformation becomes irreversible, because once you know who you are, poverty cannot attach to you. This is why I am holds supreme power, for it is not describing you, it is defining you. This is where old stories dissolve, as every false name falls away under the true declaration. This is how liberation feels, to know the name of God as your own inner being. This is where wealth becomes natural, because I am molds the world into its likeness. This is why the power of I am is the foundation of Neville's teaching about money and every other form of manifestation. Envision a world where the wealthiest thing you own is not in your wallet, but in your ability to imagine. This is how it unfolds, because Neville declared imagination creates reality, and nothing exists outside of it. This is where the illusion deepens, since society tells you wealth comes from inheritance, strategy, or labor. This is why it matters, because if imagination creates wealth, then no outer limitation can hold you. This is where destiny rewrites itself, for every fortune ever built began as a picture in someone's inner world. This is how power transfers from the external economy to the internal workshop of the mind. This is where stories of rags to riches reveal their secret, because imagination was always the hidden architect. This is why Neville urged his listeners to practice imagining scenes that imply wealth fulfilled. This is where the technique sharpens, for imagination must be vivid, consistent, and saturated with feeling. This is how the subconscious is impressed, as images burn themselves into its receptive depths. This is where reality begins to comply, reshaping opportunities and encounters to echo the vision. This is why imagination is the true currency, for it buys the experience before money even arrives. This is where you realize that money is simply imagination solidified into form. This is how empowerment grows, because you recognize that wealth is never outside your creative reach. This is where excuses die, for lack of education or connections cannot block imagination. This is why Neville's voice resonates, because he hands the power back to every person willing to imagine. This is where the future takes shape, because imagination is already designing it. This is how wealth becomes inevitable, when inner images are tended like sacred seeds. This is where confidence grows, as you see the world bend around your creative acts. This is why imagination is the fountain of wealth, and to neglect it is to remain poor in the richest universe imaginable. Think of the moment when you stop wishing for money and instead begin living as though it were already yours. This is how it unfolds, because Neville's command to live in the end means embodying the state of the wish fulfilled. This is where the illusion deepens, for most live in the middle, hoping and waiting, instead of resting in completion. This is why it matters, because living in the end bypasses doubt by assuming the result as present fact. This is where destiny rewrites itself, because imagination ceases to chase the outcome and instead rests in it. This is how power stabilizes, for when you take the end as done, the bridge of incidents unfolds automatically. This is where fear dissolves, since nothing can threaten a state already fulfilled. This is why Neville emphasized naturalness, because the end must feel so real, it becomes your dwelling place. This is where practice enters, for daily immersion in the end strengthens the state until it dominates consciousness. This is how outer evidence adjusts, reshaping itself to match the assumed end. This is where miracles appear ordinary, because what you once called impossible becomes a simple reflection. This is why persistence counts, for living in the end must outlast all contrary appearances. This is where reality becomes fluid, bending obediently to your inner certainty. This is how the invisible shapes the visible, through the quiet authority of assumed fulfillment. This is where mastery deepens, because living in the end is not imagination's play, but imagination's law. This is why Neville declared that if you live in the end long enough, it must harden into fact. This is where the tension releases, since the end relieves you from constant striving. This is how joy enters, because you already possess what you once pursued. This is where wealth consciousness finds its root, for in the end, you are already rich. This is why living in the end is the crown jewel of Neville's financial teaching. Ask yourself what happens when you no longer let past failures in money dictate your future flow. This is how it unfolds, because Neville's technique of revision allows you to rewrite the past in imagination. This is where the illusion deepens, as many believe the past is fixed and unchangeable. This is why it matters, because the subconscious holds on to memory as law unless you intervene. This is where destiny rewrites itself. For by revising a moment of lack into a moment of abundance, you shift the seed of your future. This is how freedom emerges, because you are no longer bound by yesterday's story. This is where healing comes, as revision dissolves shame and regret around money mistakes. This is why Neville urged nightly revision to cleanse the day of limiting impressions. This is where the practice strengthens, as you mentally replay events and rewrite them as you wish they had been. This is how the subconscious is redirected, now carrying the new version as truth. This is where outer reality bends, creating circumstances that echo your revised memory. This is why revision is powerful, for it redeems wasted years by planting new seeds in imagination. This is where limitation breaks, because past losses no longer weigh on your future. This is how confidence grows as you prove that nothing is beyond redemption. This is where the technique deepens, because you learn to revise financial fears, debts, and rejections. This is why Neville's teaching is merciful, for it refuses to let the past dictate the future. This is where resilience blooms, because revision turns failure into fertilizer. This is how abundance multiplies by releasing the grip of regret. This is where the story widens, for revision teaches you that time itself is obedient. This is why revision is the secret eraser, making way for new financial creation at will. Consider the possibility that faith is not hoping something might happen, but loyalty to the unseen reality already chosen. This is how it unfolds, because Neville defined faith as persisting in assumption until it crystallizes. This is where the illusion deepens, since most confuse faith with desperate wishing. This is why it matters, because true faith does not beg, it rests in certainty. This is where destiny rewrites itself, for faith makes the unseen more real than the seen. This is how courage grows, by trusting the invisible state despite outward contradictions. This is where power steadies, because faith anchors imagination like a ship in storm. This is why Neville declared faith to be loyalty to the unseen, for loyalty refuses betrayal by appearances. This is where the test arrives, when bills pile up, yet you hold inward wealth. This is how the faithful win, by standing still while the outer world rearranges. This is where bridges build themselves, as life connects the dots you could not foresee. This is why persistence in faith matters, for one wavering moment can sabotage an entire state. This is where clarity emerges, because faith simplifies the process to assume and remain. This is how identity strengthens, for faith makes you one with your desire. This is where the unseen becomes trusted friend, always delivering what was assumed. This is why faith never fails, because it is loyalty to eternal states waiting for embodiment. This is where struggle ends, since faith makes effort unnecessary. This is how peace enters, as faith relieves you from constant questioning. This is where the foundation lies, for wealth manifests to the degree you are loyal to unseen abundance. This is why faith is the cornerstone of Neville's teaching about money. Suppose you discover that every idle thought about money becomes a seed, shaping the financial garden you will walk tomorrow. This is how it unfolds, because Neville warned that imagination must be disciplined by a mental diet. This is where the illusion deepens, for people pray for wealth while indulging constant thoughts of lack. This is why it matters, because the subconscious accepts all impressions as law, not just the intentional ones. This is where destiny rewrites itself, for when you guard against doubt, fear, and complaint, you change the harvest. This is how vigilance feels, because every stray thought is either a deposit or a withdrawal. This is where mastery is tested, in the quiet hours when nobody hears your inner conversations. This is why Neville said to let no negative idea about money linger in mind. This is where the practice sharpens, as you notice the subtle voices of lack trying to sneak in. This is how strength grows, by replacing every "I can't afford it" with "I already have it." This is where new habits form, creating an atmosphere of inner wealth. This is why persistence pays, for sustained diet of abundance thoughts must yield abundance facts. This is where peace develops, as you stop entertaining panic over finances. This is how stability arises, because the mind no longer swings between hope and fear. This is where the subconscious learns loyalty, repeating only the truths you feed it. This is why Neville compared the mind to fertile soil, where only chosen seeds should be planted. This is where discipline transforms, because your mental diet becomes a daily wealth ritual. This is how authority feels, when your thoughts serve you instead of sabotage you. This is where the victory lies, for the mind trained on wealth cannot produce poverty. This is why a strict mental diet is essential to manifesting money in Neville's way. Envision a world where the moment you assume wealth, life begins weaving a bridge of incidents to carry you there. This is how it unfolds, because Neville explained that once the end is assumed, events align themselves to fulfill it. This is where the illusion deepens, for many mistake the bridge as random chance or coincidence. This is why it matters, because understanding the bridge keeps you calm while the process unfolds. This is where destiny rewrites itself, since unseen intelligence arranges steps no human could plan. This is how faith is tested, for the bridge may not look like success at first. This is where patience is required, as every encounter and delay conceals purpose. This is why Neville insisted you live in the end and trust the unfolding. This is where resistance arises, because appearances may look opposite to the goal. This is how victory is secured, by persisting in assumption despite the bridge's disguise. This is where miracles hide, as small steps lead to great fortune. This is why surrender matters, for control of the bridge is never yours. This is where the story gains suspense, because you never know how life will deliver. This is how joy arrives, when unexpected paths reveal exact provision. This is where confidence grows, as every fulfilled desire proves the bridge real. This is why Neville's students learn to expect the unexpected. This is where the magic feels ordinary, because daily incidents carry divine order. This is how destiny fulfills itself, with no wasted motion or mistake. This is where wealth appears naturally, because the bridge has been walked faithfully. This is why the bridge of incidents is proof that imagination governs every step to money. Think of the moment when you hold nothing in your hands, yet radiate gratitude, as though abundance already overflows. This is how it unfolds, because Neville taught that gratitude is the natural fragrance of the wish fulfilled. This is where the illusion deepens, for many wait until money arrives before giving thanks. This is why it matters, because gratitude beforehand signals the subconscious that the state is real. This is where destiny rewrites itself, when gratitude becomes atmosphere instead of reaction. This is how vibration shifts, saturating your environment with wealth's confirmation. This is where doubt evaporates, because a grateful heart cannot hold fear. This is why Neville insisted gratitude was proof of inner possession. This is where practice blossoms, as you end each day thankful for riches unseen but certain. This is how imagination stabilizes through the joyful certainty of thanksgiving. This is where life responds, delivering circumstances that echo your thankful state. This is why gratitude multiplies, for what you thank multiplies in experience. This is where poverty dissolves, since lack cannot coexist with true thanksgiving. This is how the subconscious is sealed by daily praise for unseen abundance. This is where wealth feels natural, because gratitude makes it so. This is why Neville's teaching carries such power, for gratitude is both seed and harvest. This is where generosity grows, as gratitude expands into giving. This is how the unseen becomes celebrated, even before it appears. This is where peace settles, for gratitude ends striving. This is why the atmosphere of gratitude is the most magnetic state for financial manifestation. Now consider this. What if luck is nothing more than disciplined imagination wearing a mask? This is how it unfolds, because Neville dismantled the idea of luck and replaced it with law. This is where the illusion deepens, as people point to chance and coincidence to explain fortune. This is why it matters, because believing in luck strips you of creative authority. This is where destiny rewrites itself, for when you see law instead of chance, you reclaim control. This is how sovereignty feels, because nothing random can rob the faithful assumption. This is where envy ends, since others' success is proof of law, not lottery. This is why Neville said, life is no respecter of persons but of states. This is where order appears, because every event aligns with assumption. This is how confidence builds, when you know results follow law, not accident. This is where the lie crumbles, for luck was only imagination fulfilled unconsciously. This is why Neville taught that discipline makes you master of fortune. This is where chaos becomes clarity, as every financial gain is traced to a state. This is how wisdom dawns, when you stop gambling with fate and start assuming deliberately. This is where stability grows, because law is predictable and secure. This is why Neville's message is liberating, for it removes superstition. This is where abundance steadies, since your fortune is no longer fragile. This is how courage strengthens, because you know law works every time. This is where success becomes inevitable, for no dice can outplay imagination. This is why the illusion of luck vanishes, replaced by the certainty of law. Consider the possibility that money was never the true goal, but the mirror reflecting who you dared to be. This is how it unfolds, because Neville's teaching closes with the truth that wealth is simply self-realization in form. This is where the illusion deepens, as many chase money without realizing they are chasing shadows. This is why it matters, because when you become wealth in consciousness, money becomes automatic. This is where destiny rewrites itself, for the final treasure is not coins but awakened imagination. This is how truth stands revealed, as the outer world bows to the inner kingdom. This is where striving ends, because the one who knows their power rests secure. This is why Neville's teaching is timeless, pointing you not to techniques, but to identity. This is where eternity whispers, reminding you that wealth is only a reflection of who you are. This is how love enters, for once you know your creative power, fear disappears. This is where generosity flows, because abundance becomes your natural language. This is why money loses its chains, serving you instead of enslaving you. This is where life opens, for consciousness creates every detail of experience. This is how peace arises, knowing nothing outside you controls your fortune. This is where sovereignty crowns you, for you are imagination itself made flesh. This is why Neville's final word echoes, that imagining creates reality, and you are the operant power. This is where the circle completes, with wealth no longer sought but embodied. This is how destiny feels fulfilled, as you live rich in consciousness and rich in fact. This is where the truth becomes simple, that money is imagination's servant. This is why the final realization is freedom itself, the awareness that you were never poor, only unaware of your own creative wealth.